calendar. So with no further ado, I want to mention David George Gordon's impressive bio. He's the author of the Eat-a-Bug Cookbook and 20 other titles. I know Rachel and I have a copy of your shark anatomy book, and we're kind of bummed that we can't see you in person to like get an autograph. Among your peers, you're known as the Godfather of insect cuisine, and as the bug chef, you've shared your exotic cuisine with visitors to the Smithsonian Institution, Singapore Food Festival, Yale University, the Explorers Club, and believe it or not, Ripley's Believe It or Not, Museum of Hollywood, San Francisco, and Times Square. It sounds like you live in Seattle with your lovely wife, Karen, and a tank full of tropical fish. Can you tell us, before you start, what is your favorite cocktail, and do you have an extraordinary fish tale?
Oh, I would have to say my favorite cocktail, well, it's seasonal, of course. I really like margaritas. I can justify I'm getting my vitamin C when I'm drinking one of those. In the winter months, I oftentimes switch over to cognac just because it gives me that warm and fuzzy feeling we all like. So cognac straight up in a brandy snifter, of course. And right now I'm moving my way into margarita season. So that's great. Now, as far as a fish tale, do you mean like as in a yarn?
I think as in like
a story.
A story, yeah.
Okay, well, I will tell you one really quickly. I used to work, when I first moved to Washington from Chicago, I worked at the public aquarium in Chicago, and I was able to wrangle myself a job at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium while they were rebuilding it in the 1980s. So a lot of my job was going out scuba diving and collecting specimens. And I was watching your scuba divers tour of Octopus Hole earlier this month and really enjoying it. But I used to go to a number of locations where there were octopuses, and I actually collect them for our aquarium, which in retrospect, I think is now not such a great thing because I just love those animals. There's a lot of evidence that says they're really intelligent and really emotional. So now I look back at that as sort of like, gee, I guess I didn't know better, because we also used to take octopuses and ship them to other public aquariums around the country. So now I think I was engaged in the slave trade in that respect. So not so good, but definitely lots of yarns in my encounters with octopuses, which I'll save for another margarita kind of event sometime later.
That's is perfect. And the octopus was this big, right?
Yeah,
well, probably bigger.
They were big. Yeah, that's right. Larger arm span than mine, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
But they're gentle giants. They are not aggressive with people at all. They just want to get out of there. So again, I sort of feel like that was not the most noble thing for me to do, to stuff them into one of those goodie bags and then take them on land and pack them into a tank and then eventually ship them to some place in the Midwest where they would live the rest of their life without seeing the great outdoors ever again. So, oh well.
The more you know. Well, with that, we're so delighted to have you here for our cocktails and fishtales. So I'm going to turn it over to you and start monitoring our feed for questions. And yeah, I'm excited to learn about some bug eating. So
all right.
Take it away. Great.
Thank you for having me. This is a real delight to be here. I'm an enormous fan of this organization. And whenever I can, I'm following Rachel's posts, primarily on Facebook. But at any rate, now it's my turn to show off a little bit about one of the subjects I've been following for, 22 years, actually. My book, the Eat-a-Bug Cookbook, came out in 1998. So moving into 23 years this spring that book has been around. And of course, I've been eating bugs all that time. Now, the fancy word for bug eating, you might want to remember this, is actually called entomophagy. Can we all say that together? Entomophagy. It means bug eating. So if you want to impress your friends, don't say, I ate a bug. That just sounds kind of rednecky to me. I ate a bug. But you want to say, I engaged in entomophagy. And then people will go, oh, did you? And then you can say, yeah, that means I ate a bug. All right. Having said that, when we talk about bug eating, we're not talking about this. These are bugs eating, right? These are actually preserved mounted cockroaches in a little diorama around the Thanksgiving table, made by a guy from New Jersey, Richard Boscarino. Look him up. He has some wonderful dioramas, all with cockroaches. We're actually talking about bug eating here, and we're talking about things that are more like this. This is a photograph of street vendors in Cambodia, and they're selling tarantula spiders. Kind of amazing. And people in Cambodia consider these a real treat. So they like to buy these, deep fry them, and eat them. I've actually found that they're quite delicious when I use them myself. We'll talk a little bit more about that as this program goes on. But you know, eating insects is pretty common. They say something like 80% of the world's cultures eat some kind of insect. 80%. We're in that 20% as Northern Europeans and descendants of Northern Europeans who don't eat bugs. We think it's weird, but clearly we're in the minority there. These, by the way, are not dried peppers like they might look like. We're talking about the marketplace in Oaxaca, Mexico, and these are all grasshoppers, all of those big piles. This is just one cellar of grasshoppers. Kind of amazing when you consider how many grasshoppers these piles amount to. They're actually wild harvested. So there's no shortage of these. People in Oaxaca have been eating these since before Columbus arrived. They're what we would call pre-Hispanic snacks. They're a large part of the indigenous culture. And, you know, even here, you can go to a good Mexican grocery and find these. They're called Chapolines. So ask for them by name. You know, there's a lot of headlines when the Seattle Mariners baseball team, at their games, they were selling Chapolines as bar snacks. They go great with a margarita, by the way. They're roasted and seasoned, and they're delicious. But they're wild harvested. They seem to be sustainable. People have been doing this for zillions of years. But I wonder, obviously, farming would be way better off and way more sustainable if we could raise these grasshoppers and prepare them for human consumption. You know, our ancestors were eating bugs. This is a nice painting of John the Baptist. Read about him in the Bible. He was kind of one of your original back to nature hippies, and he lived in a cave. He wore animal hides, camel skins, I think. And he lived on a diet of locusts, fancy way of saying grasshoppers, and honey. That was his whole thing, locusts and honey. People in the Middle East today still eat locusts. If there's a big swarm of these flying grasshoppers, they get out their nets and harvest them, salt them, and preserve them for lean times. So I started wondering, if John the Baptist was eating locusts, when did we stop? And as far as I can tell, it has a lot to do with the advent of modern agriculture. Once we started getting into farming crops and raising livestock, now all of a sudden bugs were the enemy. You know, locusts are one of the few animals that are in direct competition with humans for food. So the idea of eating them and saying they were wonderful is sort of like sleeping with the enemy. They became the enemy once we switched over from hunting and gathering to agriculture. Now, in the 1880s, a gentleman named Vincent M. Holt wrote this book, Why Not Eat Insects? It was a big hit in London. There's only one copy of this book now in existence. How do you like that? If you have one in your attic, please give me a call. but the one that is in existence is at Oxford University. And if you go onto Google Books and look at Why Not Eat Insects, you can see that original copy. It's interesting, and I actually give a whole talk. Go onto YouTube, type in my hero, Vincent M. Holt, and you'll find my lecture. It's a 15-minute piece about why Holt was inspired to write this book. It turns out it was during a time of great famine. There were the potato famines in Ireland. There was one in Finland. European countries were in they were in serious trouble there because they did not have enough food to go around because of agricultural shortages. And he wrote this book saying, you don't need to starve, you should be eating insects. He's not saying everyone should eat insects. He's saying the rich people could be enjoying their roast beef, but the servants could be eating insects. Kind of funny when you read this text. Of course, it's written all in that sort of merry old English style because it came out in Victorian England. It's a wonderful book. You can buy reprints of it. And like I said, you can find it online. I highly recommend it. So in this book, Vincent Holt also adds recipes, making this kind of a cookbook, but he also adds a whole section of really interesting menus, meal plans, if you will, for banquets. This one's quite exotic. It has wasp grubs fried in the comb. It has new carrots with wireworm sauce. Well, that's hard to say. Wireworm sauce and other delights like that. I have to say, in my life, I've kind of taken a tip from Vincent Holt. I love to host bug banquets. Well, not this past year, but certainly in years past, I've hosted a number of them. Here's one that I hosted in Seattle. Maybe some of you are familiar with these. Well, this is one of two women called the Bug Chicks. They do a lot of educational outreach about insects. They're quite wonderful. And you can see this is a fancy banquet. There's a white linen tablecloths. There's a guy playing the accordion in the background. And, you know, we had a great fair, all insects. Even more ritzy, I did a banquet for the Explorers Club in New York. They have, they had 1,000 people attend this annual banquet. It was held at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And all of these explorers, of course, they're adventurous eaters. So they had no problem with eating things like, well, this woman is eating crickets and orzo pasta, one of my favorite dishes to make. Made a giant assemblage. This banquet, people are wearing gowns and tuxedos. It's quite expensive to get in. And I had a budget of $15,000 just for the bugs. Hard to believe. Not the celery or anything else that went with them, just for the bugs. There were all kinds of great people there. One of them, probably my greatest hit, was Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he had all sorts of funny things to say about eating bugs. One of his quotes was, "I've learned to be suspicious about anything wrapped in bacon." And of course, we had these Cambodian mole crickets wrapped in bacon. Here he's actually eating one of my deep fried tarantula spiders. So we're getting a positive words, kudos from Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's about as good as it gets if you're a science geek like I am. Here's the cover of the original book, the Eat-a-Bug Cookbook. This came out in 1998. So in my younger days, I actually have brown hair in this picture. And that's actually my pet tarantula, Doris, who is no longer with us. 18 years is a long time for some of these tarantulas to live. And well, rest in peace, Doris. You'll notice the cover of this book was published by 10 Speed Press. Now they do a lot of very ritzy cookbooks, mostly from celebrity chefs. But this book was considered kind of odd when they took it on. I'm really happy that they did. And they kept it in print for over 20 years. In the book, there's all sorts of wonderful food photography. And I love food photographs. It's amazing the trouble that people go to get shots like this. These are what I call shish kebabs. They're actually skewered grasshoppers that have been marinated. They're not alive, of course. First, I freeze them, then I marinate them, defrost them, of course, and then put them onto the grill. Here's another great one, scorpion scallopini, kind of a Mexican flair here, complete with chips. And these are breaded in cornmeal and deep fried, and fried in a pan, not deep fried. They're quite delicious too. Notice that the stingers have been cut off on the tails. The tip, look at the tip of the tail, because there's no real danger in eating these stingers. The venom has been denatured by cooking, so it's not going to affect you. But the stingers are like raspberry thorns. I don't want to eat one of those. They're pretty big. So that's why I removed them. Here's another picture. This is supposed to be like a Thanksgiving dinner with a giant centipede. These things are about 12 inches long, way bigger than we have here. And I believe this one is from Vietnam, but you can also get them from South America. Some people keep them as pets. To tell you the truth, they give me the heebie-jeebies because they're sort of slithery motion, and they're really aggressive at eating. Well, throw a cricket into a tank with one of these and watch how quickly that centipede will jump on it. Now, I call this dish ample drumsticks because if you live in a family where at Thanksgiving people are always arguing over who gets the drumsticks, there are only two, right? Now you can have as many as 48 drumsticks with one of these centipedes. Pretty wild. I also love this picture because the alternative paper, the LA Weekly in Los Angeles, ran this photograph once prior to one of my appearances. And you know what their caption to the photo was? It was said, "Ooh, Brussels sprouts." So, you know, it's kind of good proof that one man's meat is another man's poison, as they say. And they were getting off on the fact that no one likes Brussels sprouts. I happen to like them, but they were totally overlooking the centipede in this picture. Okay, now we all eat bugs whether we know it or not. That's because there are bugs in a lot of our everyday foods. You can look this up. The term is called a food defect action level, and any processed food is bound to have a few bugs in it. It just kind of goes with bean dishes, jams and jellies, peanut butter, all that stuff has bugs in it. Kind of amazing. In fact, someone told me, a food scientist told me that the band around the neck of the ketchup bottle that we see here is left over from the not so good old days when they weren't very good at mixing things up, homogenizing things, and the bugs would actually rise to the top of the ketchup. Someone got smart and said, well, we'll put a little band around there. The first person to use the ketchup will get all that glop, and then everything will be just fine. Today, of course, we're way better at mixing things up. There still are bugs in there, but you're not going to see them because we're a lot better at straining them out as part of the process. Yes, it's true. Chocolate has bugs in it also. And I'll tell you, they did a study. I always love that line because they've done a study about just about everything. They did a study, which chocolate had the most bugs in it? And here it is, Reese's peanut butter cups. Now, is that going to make anybody stop eating Reese's peanut butter cups? I sincerely doubt it. And I should really tell you that the bugs that are in there are probably the best part of the candy for you. Otherwise, what are you getting? You're getting sugar, tons of sugar. You're getting artificial flavor. They even put wax into the chocolate sometimes to make it smoother. It's not good for you. The bugs in there, on the other hand, they're very rich in protein. They say grasshoppers, pound for pound, are about the same amount of protein as lean ground beef. They also have lots of vitamins and minerals. Crickets are really rich in calcium. Ladies, if you're worried about osteoporosis as you age, eat more crickets. Termites are really rich in iron. I know that seems kind of odd for a creature that eats wood, but that's also true. And you can even get things, all the amino acids from eating insects. You can even get omega-3 fatty acids. Those are antioxidants that are very good for you, and you'd normally get in things like, well, salmon or any of the oily oceanic fish. So you're doing those fish a favor by eating the bugs for that omega-3 and not eating the fish themselves. We eat all kinds of weird things. This is a jar of pickled pig's feet. I've talked to people, you know, they watch football games. They always have their pickled pig's feet at the ready. It basically comes down to this: what your parents or your grandparents gave you, you like. It's a comfort food. It's, you know, it makes us feel comforted because it's something that mom and dad and grandma and grandpa used to give us. Very few of us in this country grew up with mom and dad giving us things like tarantula spiders. So to us, that's really odd, and we may not warm up to it that much. If you lived in Japan, where this picture was taken, you'd be eating things like flying fish eggs, those really beautiful orangish colored eggs. You'd be eating seaweed, which is the wrapping there, the dark green nori seaweed. You might even be eating slices of octopus, whatever you got at the sushi bar. Those are comfort foods in Japan. So obviously the comfort foods and what mom and dad are giving us varies from country to country. The lobster is a wonderful success story. People in the New World, when the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock, that area was crawling with lobsters. They thought that was really gross and disgusting. It was like considered trash. In fact, the earliest settlers of the East Coast, New England, would actually use lobsters as fertilizer and plow them into their farm fields rather than eat them. Kind of amazing. Last time I went out to eat a lobster with friends, I was in Boston. It was $50. I had to split it with two of my buddies, so we couldn't afford it. So it's gone from being trash to being this ritzy item. There's really no accounting for food trends. I'm always amazed. I'm kind of get a lot of humor out of the word Chipotle. Yeah, there's a restaurant chain named Chipotle. It's a pepper. But before, I'll say the last 10 years or so, I had never heard that word before. Now I can see potato chips that are Chipotle flavored. There's probably a Chipotle ice cream. It's just a food trend. What was not cool before suddenly becomes cool and everybody wants it. When we talk about eating insects, we talk a lot about sushi as being kind of setting the stage. Let's say prior to the 1960s, that was getting pretty exotic and most people did not go out of their way to have sushi. Now you can basically blow your whole paycheck on one meal at a sushi bar. Who knows? This is the weirdest thing I think we all eat. How many of you out there had eggs for breakfast? Where did it come from? Little pause here. The butt of a chicken, right? Yeah, that's where it came from. And you know, we're so specific. If I said tomorrow we're all going to eat turtle eggs or lizard eggs, people would go, I don't know, I don't think I will. But actually chicken eggs are great. No one has a problem with that because it's something we were indoctrinated into eating when we were quite small. You know, scrambled eggs with cheesy eggs. That's something that I make for my grandchildren. They love it. Don't think it's weird at all. So if that's weird, why, if that's not weird, why is this so weird? This is one of my deep fried tempura battered tarantula spiders. To make this dish, I, of course, start with a dead tarantula. I don't believe in cooking with live things. That's just cruel. And freezing them is a good way to go. Because they're cold-blooded animals, they actually drift off into a deep sleep, and then they just kind of never wake up. So I have put them in, right while they're in the box, I'll put them into a freezer and then take them out and defrost them. I singe off their hairs. If you look at the tarantula up close, they're pretty hairy little guys. And those hairs can actually be irritants. They're designed to discourage things that might eat them. So that's part of the reason they have those. So I singe those off using a little candle lighter or a Bic lighter or whatever, then put them into a batter and then drop them into hot oil. You can see a number of programs online of me doing that. It's been well documented by the media. Most recently on the Late Late Show with James Corden. So see if you can find that video. It's kind of a hoot. In 2013, this big report came out, Edible Insects, Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security, and it really caught the world's attention. This is a 188-page report. It's a big document prepared by the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. They're a branch of the UN. So this is an internationally researched and circulated report. And it talks about why we should all be eating insects. It talks about how as the population of our planet keeps growing, there's not a logical way of serving people hamburgers. You know, they're going to have several billion more people on this planet over the next couple of decades. And in order to keep up with that, this report argues we should be raising insects and incorporating them more and more into our diets. It's been a slow take because people have bad attitudes about insects. They think they're weird or disgusting. And when in actuality, if we didn't have insects, we wouldn't have a lot of the crops they pollinate. Oops, sorry. We wouldn't have, we wouldn't have the animals that eat them. And also insects are enormous recyclers of dead materials and fallen leaves and things like that, putting the nutrients back into the soil where other things can grow. So dissing them does not make any sense. I'll tell you, because of this popularity of this report, there's an entire university program in the Netherlands that just basically goes from start to finish with raising insects for human consumption. And I want to point out, here are these students all in their tidy whities getting ready to make some of these dishes. If you look closely on the table, there's my cookbook. So I'm happy to say that book, it was well read and got all over the place. Well, what does it take to raise insects for food? Not a lot. This is an insect farm right here. These guys are raising locusts. And you can see it's basically an indoor operation. They have light, they have heat, they have water. That's pretty much it. And of course, whatever the grasshoppers are eating. And there they are. Look very closely on those little grow out plastic sheeting. You'll see all sorts of locusts, which are basically flying grasshoppers, clinging to the surfaces. Finally, they take these things. Now they're working with mealworms. They're making little miniature quiches with mealworms. Kind of amazing. And they actually have a network of places that sell them. If you're in the Netherlands, you can go to a deli and buy pre-prepared insect snacks. They're kind of ahead of us in that. In fact, the European Union just passed legislation this year, at the start of this year, regulating what insects are good to raise and serve people and what ones will not. So again, they're kind of leading the pack here in terms of edible insect product development. Another thing that's not so wonderful about eating mammals, like these cattle here, well, for one thing, you can see they're all jammed together in really close quarters. That's unfortunate because these animals can spread disease that way. And unfortunately, because they're warm-blooded creatures like us, sometimes those diseases can actually be passed on to people. You know, I'm thinking of mad cow disease in this case, swine flu, avian virus. There are all these things that are pretty horrible. In fact, when you look at it, COVID, what we're currently battling right now, may have started with people eating bats. So warm-blooded animals have that potential of passing things on. It's extremely unlikely for a disease organism or a parasite that lives in a cold-blooded animal like a insect to be able to pass on to humans. So we don't have to deal with that in these quarters. The other thing that's amazing is it takes incredible amounts of food and water to raise beef cattle. It takes about 2,000 gallons of water for 1 pound of steak. I'm going to repeat that. Believe it or not, 2,000 gallons of water in 1 pound of meat. Now, that's not so wonderful, is it? In fact, fresh water is a finite resource on this planet. We pretty much have what we got. We're not making new fresh water. So wasting it on raising cattle so you can have a T-bone steak just seems kind of like lunacy, really. So many other ways to go. The same thing is true about their food. It can take something like 16 pounds of grain to get 1 pound of steak. Then they're not that efficient at converting their food. Insects, on the other hand, it's almost 1 pound of food, 1 pound of insect. And some insects do not even use water at all. Those mealworms that those Netherlands guys were using, they don't use water at all. They break down carbohydrates to get their water. So we also don't need much acreage, as you saw, to raise insects in large quantity. They're a much better deal. I think the next slide I'm going to show you is my favorite slide in this entire show. So get ready for it. There it is. What is this showing us? Well, in actuality, we're talking about the gases that cattle produce, both through their flatulence, that's a fancy way of saying their farts, and also through their manure. Both ammonium and nitrogen go up into the atmosphere in gases. They gather up way up in the upper atmosphere and they form what is called the greenhouse gas layer. They're part of greenhouse gas creation. Now, these gases, they get that name because they can let sunlight in, much like the glass in a greenhouse lets sunlight in, but they hold the heat in. They don't let the heat back out. So when we talk about climate change or global warming, some of that is being driven by contributions by cattle. It turns out cattle actually produce more greenhouse gases than all of the cars, trucks, motorcycles, and other motorized vehicles on our planet. It's cattle that are bad guys. They say if we started farming grasshoppers instead of cattle, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by anywhere from 20 to 60%. Isn't it amazing? So why not eat insects? I'm going to go right back to Vincent Holt in the 1880s. I think it's a good deal for everybody. Of course, when that report came out, there was lots of coverage about edible insects on mainstream magazines and newspapers, and it was amazing. I stopped collecting the articles. There were so many of them coming out at that time, right around the time that the new copy of the Eat-a-Bug Cookbook came out. My publisher was no dummy. They said, well, your original book looks a little wacky, but now foodies think this idea is elegant. And they came up with a much more elegant version of my book. Came out in 2013, the same year that report came out. Nice illustrations done by my wife, Karen Luke Files. You can see that really nice mosaic of grasshoppers on the left page of this. And also still had a good sense of humor about it. This headline, "Don't Worry, Be Happy," was in the original book and rolled into the second book as well. And some really nice recipes. This one is orzo pasta. It looks like rice with cricket nymphs. These are 5-week-old baby crickets. I found that they're tastier. They don't have their wings yet, so there's less roughage, less crunch. when you're eating cricket nymphs. So that's kind of my campaign to get people to start eating farm-raised cricket nymphs. Now, crickets nowadays, you can actually get that are domestically reared expressly for human consumption. Kind of amazing. But you can even get organic crickets if that's your thing. And I thought this was a joke, but it's not. You can get gluten-free crickets. I was like, what? Really? Well, it turns out that the crickets are raised on a diet that includes grains and includes gluten. So to really qualify as gluten-free, they need a special diet. You can special order those from big farms. I'll talk a little bit about that as we move on with this program. Now, this dish was called by Time Magazine my signature dish, and I'm not lying, it's pretty tasty. I actually had a kid come back at one of my cooking demonstrations for thirds, fourths, and finally fifths of this dish. And I said to him, I felt like W.C. Fields, get out of here, kid, you're bothering me. I said, don't they feed you at home? Because I was amazed by how much he was just chowing down. He said to me, this is way better than anything my mom ever made. True, that's a great testimonial right there. Okay, I do want to point out some of the dishes in my book are pretty exotic. These are called honeypot ants. They live in the desert regions, southwest in the United States and Australia as well, but they live in tunnels that go down about 6 feet. To actually get these, you need to have a backhoe or something to dig them up. Now, these are actually living storage vessels. Maybe you've seen this on TV. The other ants come out, they gather flower nectar from the desert, probably at night when it's cooler. And then they go back down into these tunnels where it's always cooler. And they actually make deposits. They feed the nectar to these guys who are hanging from upside down in the walls of their tunnels, and they store it. All those things, those big yellow globes, they look like little grapes, are actually their abdomens that are distended with all of this nectar, flower nectar. Later, the same ants might come down and, after making a deposit, they want to do a withdrawal, and they can actually have some of that flower nectar. It tastes delicious. It's like eating honey sticks. But the funny thing about this, I don't tell everyone this story. In order to get this photograph, I had to buy these honeypot ants from a man who had his own little stock of them. He had like a little ant farm in his home. He said, I'd be glad to give them to you, but I have to ask you, they're $15 a piece. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the guy who spent $100 on 6 ants, including shipping. That was it. That's my boast for tonight. There's only 5 in this photo because I had to eat one as soon as it arrived. Pretty trippy. All right, where do you get insects to eat? This is by the way, is a joke photograph. Someone was very creative way back when and probably glued a picture of a grasshopper into this guy's black and white photograph. So no, you're not going to find insects this large. But where do you get them? Well, that's easy. There are a lot of novelty stores. I bet you can, in Gig Harbor, you can find these. These are, well, the one on the bottom, the dark green, is a cricket Licket lollipop. So it has a cricket inside of it. The one up there is a tequila flavored sucker with the proverbial worm in it. Now, neither of these are going to sustain you like John the Baptist on his diet of locusts and honey. You're going to need other stuff for that. But these are widely distributed novelties and have been around since before I wrote my book. You can go online and order all sorts of wild stuff. This is a can of black ants from China. In China, they sell these medicinally. They say they slow the aging process. And I actually got this from a translation right off of another can of black ants before they became popular. It said they increased sexual vigor. So they're sort of like organic Viagra in Chinese culture. True fact. Chinese pharmacies are a great place to go Go to an international district. There's a good one in Seattle. See if you can find the right seller. And this man is actually weighing out the quantity of scorpions he's going to sell me. Dried scorpions are also considered medicinal. I'm not really sure for what, but when you go to a medicinal shop, you can find an herbal shop. You can find things like dried cockroaches and ants, of course, and all sorts of insects, dried centipedes, which are supposedly a cure for tetanus. Who knew? I also go to Asian groceries, and a lot of times in the frozen food sections, here's frozen fried grasshoppers with salt. So there they are, just waiting to be purchased. It's amazing how many different products there are, often right next to the seafood section. So right next to the clams and shrimp and things like that, there would be these, well, giant water bugs, grasshoppers, crickets, all sorts of stuff. And nowadays, we have these cricket farms I was telling you about, and probably the Entomo Farms is a wonderful one. They're up in Canada. I think they're North America's largest cricket farm. And they are now producing this stuff, protein powder. They raise the crickets, they freeze them to dispatch them. They roast them, and then they grind them up into this powder. People sometimes have this barrier. They have an obstacle. I can't eat it. It's looking back at me. So this is a good way of getting around that. We're not used to seeing whole food. We don't see whole chickens. We see pieces of chickens shrink wrapped and put on plastic. When you go to a Chinese restaurant and they bring out the whole fish for a party of diners, everyone stares at it and waits for the waiter to slice it up and serve it. So cricket protein powder is great. It can go into all sorts of foods like smoothies, baked goods, add it with regular flour. And now you're getting all those vitamins and minerals and protein and things, and making what was kind of carbohydrate city now has more nutritional value. These are Chirps Chips. I see those for sale periodically at stores here. Fred Meyer, I was carrying them for a while. These are corn chips with that cricket flour mixed in. And corn chips, if you ever read the label, they're kind of nutritionally negligible. You're actually getting the value of them is the oil they were fried in. So the corn itself is not doing much for you after it's been processed. These have, they have the cricket flour mixed in. And I forget maybe it's even on the package here. Oh yeah, 20 grams of protein per bag. So now it's a nutritionally helpful thing to eat these corn chips. You can also get cricket protein bars. These are made by a company called Exo. You can find them online. I kind of like them, mostly because all the other things that have been added to them to give them flavor, banana flavor, berry flavor, chocolate, of course, coconut. I'm kind of going, wow, these are great. And I've actually sent these off with a person who was climbing Mount Everest in their backpack. They were perfect for them, lightweight and lots of protein. So that was a good thing. And 10 grams of protein in one of these cricket energy bars. I have to say, they do such a great job of concealing the crickets. If I didn't tell you there was cricket flour in there, you might never know. And my joke is, I've never, ever heard anyone say, wow, I can really taste the crickets. They just don't get it. Okay, another one I really like are Chapolines. I was telling you about those earlier. Here's a whole tub of them that I purchased from a company called Merci Mercado. They're nicely harvested from a third party, and then they process them so they can pass our rigorous health inspections and things like that, food inspectors. And you can find the actual thing, Chapulines, I was saying earlier, in some Mexican grocery stores. I know of at least one place in Seattle. And also on restaurant menus, Mexican restaurants. There's a great place called Paquitos in Seattle that has them right on their menu, and several other places in Tacoma and Seattle where I found them. Here's my favorite. I tasted the future of protein. These are grasshoppers, well, actually locusts from Harbor Foods in Israel. I just got 1,000 of these sent to me in the mail from Harbor. Remember that name, Hargol, because they're kind of marketing these as Bible snacks, just like John the Baptist ate. And you can see here on the label, it says it was kosher. Because when you read Leviticus, the chapter in the Bible that lays down what you can and cannot eat, it says, these you may eat, or excuse me, these ye may eat. There we go. And locusts are on that list. Other insects, probably not. It says they're an abomination. That's our translation. And sure enough, people in the Middle East would agree with that kosher restriction. While they're very careful to not eat broccoli if it's likely to have bugs in it, they have no problem eating these kosher locusts. Well, all of this makes me wonder, what is the real future of the food that we're likely to have? If we continue the population growth that rates that we have now, we're going to be in serious trouble. We might be facing those same famines that Vincent Holt was writing about back in his day in the 1800s. And this is not an actual product, but I love this picture because there's all organic. Even the packaging is a banana leaf in this shot. And I believe those are bamboo worms. So I'm just going to end the slideshow here and open it up for questions with this nice picture of one of the dishes I made at one of my events. Yes, this is right. It's a Panko battered scorpion. And man, the tail and the claws of this, that's where the meat is pretty darn tasty. It's just like eating a lobster. So I'm going to say, be bold and take that leap. Try something that's out of your comfort level and is certainly abundant, carefully managed when we start farming them, and sustainable. That's my thing. Sustainable foods. It's not just a novelty anymore. It's an actual movement of people who want to engage in entomophagy. All right, thank you.
That was incredible. Oh, I was thinking kind of to myself that, I was feeling a little squeamish considering the bug eating. But then when you mentioned how it's kind of weird to eat eggs, I was like, I guess we eat lutefisk every Christmas, and that's something I enjoy eating. And raw oysters, and there's the lobster thing. Like, there's all these things that we eat that we, have normalized. And so the future of bugs is very exciting.
I have to tell you, I've been on, well, in 1998, I was on Conan O'Brien, his TV show. There was like no way he was going to eat anything. I was on The View around that same time, and they were totally squeamish. But people are changing over time. It's becoming more normalized. You use that word, which I think is really the ticket here. And most recently, when I was on the James Corden show a few years ago, everybody was eating the bugs. Even the members of the band and they were passing out samples to people in the audience. It's become kind of a trendy thing among foodies now. There wasn't maybe so much of a deal when I first started in 1998.
That's excellent. And we do have a nice little slew of questions in the comments here. One of which comes from our lovely executive director. Lindsay's wondering, in your opinion, what is the most unusual bug you've ever served?
Man, I would have to say those giant centipedes are really unusual. And like I said, they give me the creeps. Very few animals do. I'm a nature nut, but they just are so unpredictable and fast and slithery that when I get them, I'm like in a hurry to freeze them. And now I have to tell you, since this is a long answer, but At one point, I was unpacking a box of these, maybe 5 of these giant centipedes. They're expensive. And one of them, it was like a scene from Alien. It leaped over my shoulder and jumped in. This is in my kitchen and went under the kitchen counter. And I was like, oh man, now what am I going to do? And I spent several days thinking about what am I going to do? How am I going to catch this thing? Can I, bait a trap with a cricket? I don't know what I'm going to do. And about 2 weeks later, my daughter came out of the bathroom and said, Dad, one of your pets is in the bathtub. And sure enough, this thing had gotten into the bathtub. It couldn't get out. And it was all covered with little, what we call dust bunnies from living underneath the cabinets, little fuzzies. And I was so happy to get it back. But of course, what did I immediately do? Clean it off and put it in the freezer.
So funny.
My husband gets mad at me because I have a pet frog and some pet lizards, and they need to eat bugs, and so we get crickets for them occasionally. And like a couple times he there'd be a cricket on his shoulder while we're watching TV or something. He's like, I can't handle that. Yeah. So I switched to roaches of all things that are easier to keep. So
yeah, right. It's funny because crickets, for some reason, are considered lovable and cuddly. So they don't have as much of a yuck factor as some of the other animals out there. I'm currently working with what they would call, pill bugs.
Oh,
isopods, right. And I'm actually getting ready for a film shoot, and I just ordered 250 organic isopods from a company in Texas. So now I'm watching those. They're cute.
There's like people that that's their pet. Like there are cow spotted isopods and purple isopods, and
that's right.
They're personable, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, same company sent me a package of the purple ones. He said, you won't believe these. Although I like the so-called common ones for my recipe. But the purple ones I'm thinking of giving to my grandkids.
They make good pets, I guess. There's one in my anole tank that I put in there as like food, and he just is not eating him. So like this little roly-poly has become like my pet. Yeah. When I water every day, he's like, oh, hey, and he comes out and scurries around.
A large part of the company's business is for cleaning up terrariums.
Yeah.
You put isopods in there and you don't have to worry about all the leaf litter and stuff that might be in there. Yeah.
That segues nicely to Jen's question of wondering if they make, or I guess breed, wingless crickets like they do for fruit flies that I'm assuming get fed to Rachel's frogs.
Yeah, I'm sure he's wanting get them young without wings, please, because they're noisy sometimes.
That's right. That's a really good question. That's why I prefer the wingless nymphs. Right up until maybe the last couple of molts, as insects grow, they shed their body armor, and then now they're free to become a little bigger, and then they harden the body armor, and away they go. So there's probably like 12 different molts in a series before they're grown up. The last 2 molts, I think, is when they get their wings. So I like the wingless ones too. I do have to say, though, to answer your question directly, I don't think there's enough research in food insects. We've been kind of lazy so far, and it's unfortunate because there's something like 2,000 different edible insects, and we're basically stuck with crickets, mealworms, maybe cockroaches if people can overcome their biases, but a very small spectrum of insects that are being raised, locusts, that are being raised for food. So we need to get entomologists, insect doctors, to really research this and develop some even finding new species that you think these crickets are great. These crickets are delicious. We need to get connoisseurs out there who can tell that. So good question. I appreciate that.
The sommeliers of the cricket world.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
This pairs nicely with what,
Yeah. Which, Mary asks, what other foods would we need to augment a diet of bugs. And maybe what drinks would pair nicely is a nice cocktails and Fishtales way.
Yeah, right. That's right. No, talk about that in the Eat-a-Bug Cookbook, that a lot of the seafood pairings, because most of these insects have delicate flavors. They're not robust. So if you had sangria or something like that, it would overshadow the insect. But things like a crisp Chardonnay or a Semillon Blanc would go really well. A lot of the wines you would choose to go with oysters go great with insects. So I think the thing is, insects themselves are actually a superfood. They have all the things you want. Maybe you'd like carbohydrates. A fun fact I picked up along the way is that the ancient Aztecs, the natives of Central and America and Mexico, they used to eat corn. They were one of the first cultivators of corn. But corn is not as deficient in the amino acid lysine. You can't just have a diet of corn and grow naturally into a good, healthy human being. So they actually would sell ears of corn that had caterpillars on it called corn earworms. They're a pest. If you're growing corn, that's a pest. They would actually sell the corn with the corn earworms for more money than just plain old corn. So maybe they had like kind of an ancestral wisdom about trying to augment the shortage of lysine.
Ancestral wisdom and a stellar marketing plan.
Yeah, right.
That's right. Well, they are really a superfood. That's what I say. They're food of the future, and they're a UN-sanctioned superfood.
Great, which goes nice with Lindsay's question of, do you want to give us a prediction of when do you think this trend will move beyond the foodies, and when will eating bugs be more accepted among the average consumer? I'm assuming specifically the average American consumer.
Don't we all want to know the answer to that one? It's surprising to me. Things have changed a bit in the 20 years that I've been watching that trend. That products are out there and more people are doing it. There's several bug chefs. I used to be, you don't like my rates, get yourself another bug chef, because knowing that they couldn't find one. But that's not true anymore. I would not use that line. But it's so hard to predict the way people's food trends go. I personally believe a lot of it has to do with working on people's bad attitudes towards bugs. That as long as people are running around going, ooh, yuck, and not, ooh, yum, we're going to have a hard sell. So as people get more sophisticated with the way this planet works and the wonderful things that insects do, the more likely they are to get over those inhibitions. So that's what I try to do as an educator. I try to explain to people that this is an interesting and useful animal, and in some cases quite beautiful. You find the right ones. I'll also say that when I was a youngster, if you found a coffee cup, it would have a ladybug on it or a butterfly. They're like the ambassadors of the insect world. Nowadays, you can find coffee cups that have all sorts of rhinoceros beetles and dragonflies and all sorts of exciting stuff. So I think we're getting a little more comfortable thanks to shows like Animal Planet and institutions like your own, that people are realizing they're not so bad.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of kind of the troubles of shark conservation, where sharks are portrayed as this villainous, toothy top predator trying to, eat everything, and when really there's, many species and they're important for our oceans. How do you take the villain out of the things you want to protect?
The toothiest top predator are people. Unfortunately, they're the ones who are totally wiping out whole species of sharks for what? Things like shark tails or shark fin soup.
Yeah.
It's silly, I think.
I know, you could easily swap that for cricket flour soup, and it's probably going to taste the same and save the planet, right?
Probably do a lot better for you. Just to directly answer that question, it's impossible to put a timeline on things, but I'm saying the way things are going, I bet in 10 or 20 years, the idea of eating bugs will be normalized.
But we'll start including it in some of our stewardship messaging, that's for sure.
That's for sure. That would be great. I have to tell you also that, we're spending a lot of time and energy trying to convince Americans to eat insects. But there are places throughout the world where people have been eating insects for thousands of years. And they don't think there's anything weird in that. They don't even think they're called insects. They're just that food, the same way that we talk about beef rather than eating a cow, So a friend of mine has this company called Farms for Orphans. It's beautiful, and it's teaching orphans in the Congo to eat these palm weevils. Those are big, big larvae. They almost look like they're like white or ivory colored pork sausages. They're about that big.
Wow.
People just love these things, and they sell them in markets. So the people in orphanages are actually raising them, selling them to augment the cost of the orphanage, and also eating them themselves to augment the rampant malnutrition that's all over the Congo. The same person adopted 2 Congolese children. They weren't even on the growth scale in the United States. They were so small. And then, of course, naturally, after 6 years of life in the United States, they just totally skyrocketed and grew to their normal size, but they were becoming dwarfed by their malnutrition. So I say, take the effort and bring it to places where they already like eating bugs, and show them how to raise things like termites or ants or grasshoppers sustainably. That's my campaign.
No, I agree. I think it's all about exposure. Human beings, we're curious. We're can be adventurous if we're given the opportunity. But that exposure, especially what you're saying, like kind of early on, if you experience these foods as a kid and have fond feelings and memories associated with them, then it's easy to translate those on into adulthood, and then it's ingrained. Then it's easy to do.
Yeah. I also think a lot of it's about celebrity endorsements. And there are a few people who have come out and talked about their experiences with eating insects. So, I mean, like movie stars. But if you had people like, Brad Pitt having parties and serving insects, then pretty soon everybody would want to do it just like Brad Pitt. That's sort of the story of sushi. It started out as something that ad agents with big expense accounts would take people out for an exotic meal. And now you can buy sushi at 7-Eleven. Not very sushi,
right.
But it's become normalized through them.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, for the big event you put on and you had the $15,000 bug, budget, what you mentioned, the $15 ants and things. What is like the most expensive bug on the menu?
Well, tarantulas are expensive, and even at a discount rate, they're about $15 a piece. And you probably would like, if you're going to have an actual meal of them, you'd probably like 2 or 3 of them. Because just like lobsters, where is the meat? Well, the meat is the muscle of the tarantula, so it's all in the legs, really. And the abdomen is like trying to pick meat out of a crab, kind of difficult. So yeah, I think that would be a $45 protein fix right there. So that's pretty expensive.
Is it, David, is it hard for you having owned bugs as pets? Like you mentioned Doris, is it then hard to turn around and then serve those same species?
Yeah, it is a little bit. Tarantulas are pretty lovable creatures. It's funny, I was doing an interview with someone talking about the fear of insects, and they actually used this expression. They said they're kind of creepy and cuddly at the same time because they're fuzzy like little teddy bears.
Oh, I have a funny story about how fuzzy tarantulas are. I was doing a similar, don't be afraid of insects. It was a face your fears night in college. My husband was an RA and had to host events, and I worked in the biology department and had access to the animal collection. And so we put on this like Face Your Fears, and it was snakes and spiders and stick bugs and cockroaches. And to show people like how unafraid of tarantulas, I let a rose hair tarantula just crawl on my face, which was fine. It was not scary. They're sizable insects. But so she wouldn't fall, I tilted my head and she stuck her foot just straight down into my ear. And let me tell you, it took every ounce of like control that I had not to just flap her across the room, because that took so much.
That's really a good. Now that's a fishtail.
Yeah, there you go. That's your wild story from me.
You know, it's funny. Tarantulas have two different kinds of hairs, and they use them for sensory stuff mostly because they can feel crickets creeping across the ground. They can feel it through those hairs. But they also have these hairs called urticating hairs. And depending on the species, they can actually shoot them, kind of like the folk tale about porcupines. Porcupines can't shoot their quills, but these guys can. So if a raccoon is trying to eat a tarantula, it might get a snoot full of these urticating hairs, which tells it to go somewhere else.
That's wild.
No.
I see a lot of good marketing ideas in our Facebook comments here. And I'm just gonna maybe put a call out for any last questions before we kind of start to wrap things up.
I like the questions so far. They've been thoughtful and respectful, so that's great.
I have another question while Tina's reading through the chat. Do you find insects work better with sweet foods or savory kind of recipes?
Well, I think it's the thing of they're the protein. And matter of fact, I joke about if you go to a sushi restaurant, you can order a thing called a spider roll.
Yeah.
It's actually soft shell crab.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to go in there and go, what a jip. I ordered spider rolls and it came with a soft shell crab. But I think that's kind of the combination. You'll need a carbohydrate like, orzo is a wonderful mix there, or rice or quinoa or whatever. You probably also want to have a salad. You know, I tell people going to an insect banquet does not necessarily mean that everything has to be insects. You go to a chicken dinner, you're not going to start with chicken soup and then chicken appetizers and then on the sides a little chicken. You know, you have other things too, and that's part of the ritual. The way we consume food is very ritualized. You know, there are certain foods that you only have with other foods. So, you know, I'm going to have salmon. Well, get out the baked potato or with the rice or whatever. It's very prescriptive of what we build a meal around. We aren't doing that with insects because it hasn't been done for that long. So it's a new thing.
Great question. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions popping up in the chat. So,
well, Rachel, I have a question for you.
Oh.
Where did you go to school where you had fear night? Face your fear night?
Central Washington University.
Oh, all right. Good one.
Yeah, it was fun. We had a good time. I did get bit by a snake and had a tarantula step in my ear on the night. So it wasn't the most successful night for me, but we started with people like peeking in the door and ended with them letting a tarantula, walk across their face or holding a snake or, whatever.
I have to tell you, there's this whole thing. I hate this expression, creepy crawlies. I see it all the time in newspaper articles, even in magazine articles about edible insects. They throw this word in. I'm always like, creepy to who? Back off. But I can guarantee you when Halloween rolls around, I start getting all these gigs because there's this whole thing about fear. And I've done like a lot of these face your fears kind of events, always around Halloween. And I'm actually pushing a whole new movement. Let's celebrate Thanksgiving by enjoying what the Native Americans ate, which was things like pemmican that had insects in it.
Yeah.
Well, that's my new holiday. Forget about Halloween, while it does pay the bills, I really prefer doing events around Thanksgiving.
There you go. I like
Yeah.
it.
That's incredible. And again, we're just so thankful to have you join us for our Cocktails and Fishtales series. It's really exciting and inspiring to learn about insects as a source of protein. And I don't know, I'm excited to go try some bugs.
See if you can find some of those Exo energy bars. I highly recommend them.
It's a good place to
They
start.
crickets are the gateway bug. That's the big line about that.
We did, Lindsay mentioned her husband said they're pretty popular in the hiking community. So
Good. Good.
What was it? I look forward to engaging in
entomophagy.
Entomophagy.
There you go. It sounds so highborn. Literally means eating insects.
Love it.
Well, thank you all for having me. I just love Harbor Watch, and I'm an enormous fan. Do you have T-shirts?
We do. We'll make sure you get one.
T-shirts and a membership come your way.
Yeah, that would be great, because I just think that you guys are doing what needs to be done. I'm currently rewriting a book about oysters. So
nice.
The whole history of the oyster industry, and studying things like clam baskets the Native Americans used to haul shellfish around in. And it's just a fascinating history, and people either love them or hate them, but they definitely are a topic that, you know, counts as highborn eating. They're ritzy. So it's kind of a nice contrast to the insect world for that one.
People always ask me, you know, do you eat seafood? Do you eat shellfish? And I'm like, no, they're my coworkers. I like teach people about them.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
like crabs too much to eat them, but that doesn't stop everyone.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to stop me, that's for sure. But well, at any rate, bless you all for the work that you're doing. It's really important. It's really valuable. And I really love the fact that you make it fun.
Oh, thanks.
Learn,
that's our motto. Learn, have fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye to our Facebook friends. For everyone who tuned in this evening, we appreciate you joining to learn and have fun with us tonight. You can look forward to next month's Cocktail and Fishtales event. We'll be talking about how tracking things like sharks and tuna, as well as like kind of mapping that off with the fisheries and understanding the relationships between fisheries and those fish can help us better manage and conserve those species. So that will be with Tim White, and we're excited to learn more about that. So you'll have to tune in next month. And of course, we'll have all sorts of digital programming throughout the month until then. And you can check our Facebook events and website calendar for those. So again, thank you so much for the great questions and for everyone tuning in. There's lots of love coming in from the chat right now to you, David. So I'm going to go.
I want to throw in the last word with this bug appetit.
Nah.
Perfect. Bug appetit.
All right. Thank you.